I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually thankful my car got a flat tire that morning. If it hadn't, I might never have caught Barbara Thompson, or, as the neighborhood now famously knows, her pipeline. Karen, in the act of committing what would turn out to be a six-figure crime of vandalism. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, because to truly understand how a seemingly normal Wednesday morning turned into a neighborhood-wide emptying and a viral community breakdown, you need to know what led up to that moment. I had lived in Oakwood Gardens for just over 2 years when Barbara Thompson decided to start war on my driveway. Our community was one of those nice tree-lined suburban developments where most people mainly cared about keeping their property values while still actually living their lives. The homeowner association was generally pretty fair. Maintain your lawn. Don't paint your house neon colors. Keep your trash bins out of sight except on collection days. You know, the usual stuff that keeps a neighborhood looking nice without turning it into a fascist microstate. That all changed when Barbara Thompson moved in 6 months ago and immediately started her campaign for a seat on the homeowner association board. I still remember her campaign speech at the annual meeting, delivered with the passion of someone running for high office rather than a voluntary position managing a suburban subdivision's visual guidelines. I've noticed a worrying trend of declining standards, she announced to the half-empty community center, her French manicured hands gripping the podium. Paint colors that barely meet code requirements, mailboxes that haven't been cleaned in months, garden gnomes. Here she paused dramatically in non-approved poses. I wish I could say was exaggerating about the garden gnome thing. Poor Mrs. Chen from 2 streets over actually received a written warning about her cheerful ceramic gnome doing a handstand. Apparently, only straight gnomes were technically permitted under our community guidelines. The previous board had always operated on common sense and good neighborly relations, but Barbara promised what she called rigid adherence to standards. She won the election largely because most people had better things to do than attend homeowner association meetings, and immediately set about turning our nice community into her personal kingdom. Within her first month on the board, violation notices increased by 300%. She checked grass height with a ruler. She created a spreadsheet noting the exact shade of every front door in the development. She even tried to charge the Henderson family for having a birthday party that featured, I kid you not, non-approved balloon colors. I managed to stay off her notice for the first few months, mainly because I worked long hours at my job in corporate communications and wasn't home much during her daily compliance inspections. But everything changed the day Barbara discovered that one small section of my driveway was slightly darker than the rest. It's stained, she announced one morning, standing at the edge of my property with her ever-present clipboard. I was heading to work, but stopped when I saw her measuring the width of my driveway with a bright yellow tape measure. The homeowner association guidelines clearly state that all concrete surfaces must maintain a consistent gray tone. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I was a professional who handled difficult people every day at work. Good morning, Barbara. The driveway was approved by the homeowner association when I moved in. If you have concerns, you can send them through the proper channels. She adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and pursed her lips into that particular look that suggested she was doing everyone a favor by gracing us with her presence. I am the proper channel now, and I'm telling you, this driveway is in violation. You have 2 weeks to repair it, Barbara, I said, trying to maintain my calm, professional tone. That's not a reasonable request. The driveway is perfectly functional, and any slight variation in color is normal for concrete of this age. She pulled out her phone and started taking photos, each snap of her camera punctuated by a disapproving sound. I've documented the violation. See these darker patches? Completely unacceptable. It's bringing down property values. It's a 2-year-old concrete driveway. I pointed out some change is normal. I'd be happy to have a professional concrete contractor examine it, if you're concerned. Oh, I've already consulted with several experts, she said, though I noticed she didn't name any. They all agree with me. This level of Discoloration is simply unacceptable in a high-quality community like Oakwood Gardens. I tried explaining that slight discoloration was normal for 2-year-old concrete, especially in climate. I even offered to power wash it, though I knew it wasn't necessary. But Barbara was on a mission. Over the next month, I received 3 official violation notices, each accompanied by increasingly hostile personal visits from Barbara. The first notice arrived in a certified letter, complete with close-up photos of my allegedly unacceptable driveway and highlighted excerpts from the Home Owner Association guidelines. The second came with a $150 fine and more photos, this time with helpful arrows pointing to areas Barbara found particularly offensive. The third notice included a warning: fix the driveway within 7 days or face escalated enforcement actions. I complained to the other board members, but Barbara had somehow maneuvered herself into being the head of the Architectural Review Committee. My neighbors were supportive, but hesitant to get involved. Just last week, she cited the Patels for having wind chimes that exceeded the approved sound level. My next-door neighbor Susan whispered to me one evening she actually brought a sound meter to measure them. The situation might have remained a simple annoyance if not for that flat tire. I'd been working from home that Wednesday morning on a video call with clients when I heard an odd mechanical sound from outside. I apologized to my team and stepped away to investigate, only to discover 2 nails in my rear tire. Unusual, since I hadn't driven over any construction areas recently. As I was examining the damage, the unmistakable sound of a jackhammer shattered the quiet of our suburban street. I rounded the corner of my house to find Barbara Thompson dressed in what appeared to be brand new work boots and a safety vest that still had the price tag dangling from it, operating a rented jackhammer on my driveway. She had already carved a rough trench about 3 feet long into my supposedly substandard concrete. "Barbara!" I shouted over the noise, barely able to believe what I was seeing. "Stop immediately. This is unlawful." She killed the jackhammer and pushed her safety glasses up onto her forehead, revealing the kind of satisfied smile usually reserved for cartoon villains. "Oh, good, you're home. Since you refused to address the violation, the Homeowner Association is taking corrective action. Don't worry, I'll bill you for the repair work." I pulled out my phone and started recording, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Barbara, you have no legal right to destroy my property. Pack up your equipment and leave now, or I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," she smirked, reaching for the jackhammer again. "I have documentation of your violations." The Homeowner Association bylaws clearly state. The rest of her sentence was drowned out by the renewed hammering. I was already dialing 911 when I noticed something that made my blood run cold about 6 feet from where Barbara was enthusiastically destroying my driveway. A small yellow flag marked the presence of underground utilities. I'd noticed it last week, when the gas company had been doing their routine line inspections. "Barbara, stop!" I screamed, waving my arms wildly. "There are gas lines." Crack. The sound was different this time, more empty. Barbara must have felt it too, because she paused, looking at the ground. That's when I smelled it. The unmistakable rotten egg odor of natural gas. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. My neighbor Ted, a retired firefighter who'd spent 30 years with the city fire department, came running out of his house, yelling for everyone to clear the area. Barbara finally seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation, dropping the jackhammer with a bang that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent street. Car alarms started going off as the gas leak grew stronger, their electronic wailing a perfect soundtrack to the chaos unfolding on our normally quiet street. I was already on the phone with 911, trying to keep my voice steady as I reported a gas problem in a residential area. The dispatcher assured me emergency services were on their way, but those next few minutes felt like hours. The gas company's emergency response team arrived first, their bright yellow trucks racing down our street with lights flashing, followed by what seemed like every fire truck and police car in the city. Ted, bless him, had already started going door-to-door, making sure everyone was evacuating. "Get back," he shouted, His years of emergency response training activating everyone needs to be at least 200 feet back. The local news vans weren't far behind the emergency vehicles, because nothing draws media attention quite like the possibility of a suburban neighborhood going up in flames. As the authorities evacuated our street, I couldn't help but notice Barbara's face growing whiter by the minute. Her designer sunglasses were now perched crookedly on her head, and her perfectly styled hair was coming undone in the growing chaos. But it wasn't until the police chief's cruiser pulled up that she truly started to panic. Chief Martinez stepped out of his car, the same model as mine, I noticed, with a touch of sarcasm, and surveyed the scene with a grim expression. His eyes moved from the abandoned jackhammer to the growing crowd of evacuated neighbors, many of whom were pointing at Barbara and talking excitedly into their phone. Some were already live streaming the whole thing, because, of course, they were. Finally, his gaze settled on me. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet street, "I believe we need to have a conversation about unauthorized excavation and damage to public utilities." Barbara's clipboard clattered to the ground, the sound somehow louder than it should have been in the tense atmosphere. As it turned out, her day was about to get much, much worse, but none of us could have predicted just how far the ripples of her actions would spread, or how our quiet suburban community would never be quite the same after what happened next. Looking back now, I realized that the moment that jackhammer hit the gas line was just the beginning. What followed would involve state utility commissioners, criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and the most intense homeowner association board meeting in Oakwood Gardens history. But standing there that morning watching the gas companidiums rushing to contain the leak while Barbara's perfectly manicured world collapsed around her, I had no idea that this was just the start of a chain of events that would change our entire community. The next few hours were a blur of emergency vehicles, news reporters, and increasingly worried text messages from neighbors who'd been evacuated to the nearby shopping center parking lot. The gas company teams worked efficiently to shut off the line and begin repairs, but the damage was already done, both to the infrastructure and to Barbara's carefully built image of authority. I stood with Chief Martinez near his police cruiser, explaining everything that had led up to this moment. When I mentioned the mysterious flat tire I'd discovered just before Barbara started her unauthorized demolition work, his expression hardened. "Show me," he said, following me to my car. He examined the nails stuck in my tire, then pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. "These match the ones we found in my cruiser's tire this morning. Same unusual head design. Their specialty, flooring, nails." He straightened up his face, serious. "And I know exactly where they came from." Turns out Barbara had been doing some home renovations the previous week. Several neighbors had reported about construction debris in the street, including distinctive flooring nails that had scattered during her contractor's work. She ignored their concerns naturally, because homeowner association board members apparently didn't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. "The nails in your tire and my cruiser aren't accidents," Chief Martinez said. "They're proof of criminal vandalism. Your security cameras catch anything?" As a matter of fact, they had. After Barbara's increasingly aggressive violation notices, I installed a comprehensive security system. The previous night's footage clearly showed a figure in a distinctive designer tracksuit, Barbara's signature look for her early morning rule inspection walk sprinkling something near my car, and the chief's cruiser, which he often parked in front of his house just down the street. While we reviewed the footage, the gas company's assessment team delivered their early report. The damage was serious. Barbara's jackhammer had not only ruptured the main gas line, but had also damaged several other utility connections. The entire street would need emergency repairs, and several homes would be without gas service for at least a week. Barbara, meanwhile, had moved from pale to slightly green as the results of her actions became clear. The utility company supervisor was explaining to her exactly how many state and local laws she'd broken, while a growing crowd of neighbors watched from behind the safety cordon, many of them live streaming the whole thing. "Ma'am, did you contact 811 for utility marking before beginning excavation?" the supervisor asked, though we all knew the answer. I didn't think, Barbara mumbled, her designer sunglasses now clutched nervously in her manicured hands. No, you didn't, Ted, my firefighter neighbor, cut in. He joined the group after helping coordinate the evacuation, and it could have gotten someone killed. Do you have any idea what could have happened if that gas had found an igniter source? The seriousness of the situation finally seemed to hit Barbara. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time since I'd known her, she was completely speechless. But the day's revelations weren't over yet. As if the gas line rupture and nail vandalism weren't enough, Barbara's actions had triggered a wave of investigations. The county prosecutor's office took a particular interest in her homeowner association activities, especially after several neighbors came forward with stories of strange damage to their properties. Following arguments with Barbara, the Patels, it turned out, hadn't just received a notice for their wind chimes. They'd found their carefully tended garden ruined. The day after challenging one of Barbara's violations, the Hendersons' non-approved birthday party had ended with mysterious marks all over their cars. And Mrs. Chin's hand-standing garden gnome hadn't just disappeared. It had been broken and the pieces arranged in what she described as a scary manner on her doorstep. We've been documenting everything, Mrs. Chen revealed, pulling out a thick folder of photographs and correspondence. We were afraid to come forward individually, but together. She pointed to the group of neighbors who had gathered around her, each with their own stories of Barbara's escalating tactics. The homeowner association board called an emergency meeting for that evening. Once the gas line was secured and residents were allowed to return home, the community center was packed. I'd never seen so many people at an homeowner association meeting. Barbara's chair at the board table remained conspicuously empty. In light of today's events and the ongoing criminal investigation, the board president announced, "We've unanimously voted to remove Barbara Thompson from her position on the board. Furthermore, we're initiating a complete review of all violations and fines issued during her tenure." The room erupted in applause, but the board wasn't finished. They proceeded to introduce a series of changes to prevent future abuses of power, including mandatory ethics training for board members, a new appeals process for violations, and my personal favorite, a requirement that all enforcement actions be approved by at least 2 board members. Mrs. Chen was elected to fill Barbara's empty board seat. Her first official act was to propose an amendment to the garden decor guidelines, specifically permitting gnomes in any pose that brings happiness to the community. It passed unanimously. As for Barbara, the results of her actions continued to unfold in the weeks that followed. The criminal charges for vandalism and reckless endangerment were just the beginning. The gas company's civil lawsuit for damages would keep her lawyers busy for months. Her real estate business declined too, once the video of her jackhammer rampage went viral. Turns out potential clients aren't particularly eager to work with an agent who became known as Pipeline Karen across 3 states. She put her house on the market 2 months later, but not before receiving a detailed violation notice about her non-conforming for sale sign placement. The new design review committee, led by Mrs. Chen, was particularly careful in their inspection. They even brought out a ruler to measure the sign's distance from the sidewalk. The last time I saw Barbara, she was directing movers as they loaded her designer furniture into a truck. She avoided making eye contact with any of the neighbors, especially me. Her notorious clipboard was nowhere in sight. My driveway still has that slightly darker patch. That started it all. The homeowner association's new rules, specifically, address concrete discoloration. Natural weathering patterns are considered normal and acceptable as they tell the story of our community's history. Sometimes I catch my neighbors looking at it and smiling as they walk past the gas line repair crew. Did an amazing job restoring everything. They even added some extra safety markers and updated all the utility mapping in the neighborhood. Ted organized a neighborhood emergency response class, which has become a monthly event. It turns out nothing brings a community together quite like surviving a wannabe homeowner association dictator with a jackhammer. We still have a homeowner association? Of course. The lawns are still neat, the house is well maintained, and the property value stable. But there's a different atmosphere now. The monthly meetings include potluck dinners and actually feel like community gatherings. Mrs. Chen's garden gnome collection has grown. She now has a whole yoga class of them in various poses. And that slightly darker patch on my driveway, I've grown quite attached to it. It's a reminder that sometimes the flaws in our perfect facades can lead to something better. A stronger community, smarter neighbors, and the occasional viral video hit. Though I do make sure to check my tires every morning, just in case. Some habits fade hard.